So, now we're going to switch over to the chatting screen because we're going to talk about Silent Hill 3. So, as always, whenever we complete a game, we talk about a game from a mechanical standpoint, we talk about a game from a story standpoint, and then I give you an overall recommend, not recommend, caveats, all of that stuff. So, mechanically, very Silent Hill. Probably the, what I would say is the most, like, next step Silent Hill from 1, because this one feels closer to 1 than I think 2 did, and I think that's because the supporting cast in this one isn't as overt as it is in 2. But mechanically speaking, it's the same. You have you got melee weapons, you got ranged weapons, you fight monsters, you don't fight monsters, you solve puzzles, you move through the different areas, you go through normal world, you go through other world, and you go. Now, the way it handles other world in this one is really interesting, where it's not like we saw there in the church, where we saw a normal church, and then it got cut at a certain point and became a like twisted otherworld church. So we saw the two worlds kind of melding together, right? And that's interesting from a story standpoint. We'll talk about that a lot. There's a lot to talk about in the story standpoint, but mechanically speaking, there's a couple like red herring things where like you get hit on the track at the beginning of the game, and that's how you wake up. There's the again on the train tracks where you go touch a red door, and then if you don't get back up quick enough, you get hit by a subway train. So there's some like red herring things in there mechanically, but overall it plays very much like you would expect a game in this series to play. The weapon variety is not, there's not a lot of weapon variety, honestly. I think it might have, let's see, what, like 8 weapons essentially, because you've got some machine gun, you've got shotgun, you've got pistol, and then you have the maul, the pipe, the katana, and the knife, I think. So that's what, 7? Now we might have missed one or two, but yeah, it doesn't have a lot of weapons, which the reason why I'm bringing that up is later in the series we'll see what happens when we do get a lot of weapons, especially when they break. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, so mechanically, not much to talk about. The normal kind of Silent Hill experience from a mechanical standpoint. Story-wise, here's where I'm probably going to ramble for far too long. This story has a lot going on. It has a lot going on from basically from the start to the finish. We see not only our character progress in their own development, which happens a lot in Silent Hill, we also see them actually directly and indirectly deal with the things that happened, right? So one of the topics, and again, this is where things are going to get a little triggering. So if you don't want to have those kinds of discussions about things that might be upsetting, this is the time to tune away. This is going to be into the stream as well after we get done talking about it. So feel free to throw us a follow and tune in next weekend for Silent Hill 4. But so, if you can't tell, there's 2 bosses in particular that really sell the idea, but nothing basically specifically comes out and says it. But there's a lot of discussion about basically sexual assault and forced birth. The reason why those topics come up is the first boss is called Split Worm. It looks very phallic, and that's very on purpose. The next boss is called Missionary, which, if you don't know, is a position that people have intercourse in. So there's a lot of moments, Vincent popping up in the motel room, Douglas, like, chasing you around the mall, right? There's a lot of moments for Heather where there's some creepy guy basically following her. Right, even in the Douglas scene, she escapes through a window in the bathroom. That's how unsafe she felt with Douglas following her. Now, of course, she doesn't know Douglas at that point, so it just makes sense that she's like, I got to get somewhere safe, right? Later on, we find out Douglas is not a bad guy. He's just just a PI that's trying to do his job who gets tricked by this cult leader who we'll talk about in a bit. But it's very obvious with like that one of the enemies is called Closer, or some people call it the Closer. I think it's meant to be closer as in come closer. Also, there's a part where we're going up, I think, an elevator, and one of the guys is turning the wheel, and right above him, or maybe stairs, but like right above him is a female figure in a certain position. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of hints at it. It's never stated completely that happened, but the fact that it's all about Heather being forced to give birth, which again we'll get into the religious aspect of that in a little bit, it leads some credence to the theory that something happened to Heather, that led to that kind of thing. So that is why I think this story can be, once you start realizing that portion of it, it can be very upsetting for people. So like it's one of those that's like, I think it's subtle enough to where, well, except Splitworm. Splitworm is the most obvious one. Like Splitworm is very obviously phallic by design, but outside of that, there's not really a direct, like, this is exactly what happened. But there is a lot of talk throughout the game, not just in Heather's story, but in a lot of people's story, about abuse and about just like a lot of childhood trauma stuff, right? Like even Harry wasn't 100% on board with the reincarnation Heather, this version that we're where he even said he wanted to wrap his hands around her neck as a child, which is a really messed up visual, by the way. Again, it doesn't show that, but it does talk about it. And like that is Harry processing the idea that he essentially lost a daughter and gained a different daughter, right? Because if you remember from the first game, when you do the good ending, the Cheryl and Alessa basically become one, and then Kaufman throws the liquid, which is in the pill that Heather takes. Again, we'll get to that in a second. Throws the liquid, and then Samael like flies out of Alessa. It separates Alessa and the god essentially, and then after all of that, Alessa like reincarnates as this child through a portal, and then Harry and Lisa take the child and go on, right? And then he raises this new child as Heather, knowing that it is essentially Alessa. So there's talks about like loss and the perception of this isn't my kid, right? And that's important, again, for Heather's story because of the whole idea of a forced birth of a god, right? Having a child that you don't want is mentioned, and it's only mentioned there at the end when it's very clear that birth is an important thing. Also, as Zwex mentioned, but also at that last little circle, the very end when Claudia gets grabbed from the hole, it's a hole that gets like pulled open in a certain design that represents kind of that birthing phase. So instead of her like giving birth physically, it's more metaphysically giving birth, as that's the hole that you approach to fight the god. So as you can tell, like I said, it's got a lot of messed up things. Also in the vein of the talking about the birthing and stuff. One thing that I don't know if this is a thing in a lot of countries. I know it's a thing in America. There are pills that you can take. They're called Plan B pills. That basically if you think you're going to become pregnant because of intercourse or an activity or assault or whatever, you can take Plan B, and it's supposed to keep you from basically having that pregnancy. which is interesting because Heather takes a pill that forces her not to have this child, right? And when the child, the godchild, is removed from her body, it is still in a very much like fetus-like form. It's not until it's birthed by Claudia that it becomes some bigger, monstrosity. So there is, and of course this game came out in, let's see, I think it's 2003. I want to say, yeah, 2003. So you have to remember that the times were different. That was 20 years ago, 21 years ago specifically. So there's a lot of this stuff. That's why I want to see more of this explored through the series, and we'll see. But another topic that's touched on is religious trauma. So you can see it with Claudia, you can see it with Vincent, and you can read about it with Alessa as a child, right? We went to the school scene, and that the teacher was talking about maybe taking legal actions because Dahlia was mistreating Alessa, which we know happens. We saw a scene in the first game where we basically see her like dragging Alessa down a hallway by her arm. But so that one is shown to us visually in the first game, but that's kind of added on to by the scene with or the paper that we read from the teacher, because it's like, okay, this wasn't going unnoticed, right? People were noticing, so that means that there was significant damage being done physically, not to mention mentally, but physically to this child, right? And as we heard from us getting that game over, which is the reason why I wanted to talk about it, that hate is what they tried to use to feed the god. So if we shoot Claudia, we give into the hate, and the god is born because we fed into that hate. Which is also interesting given the scene with the confessional, where she talks about that she hurt a child, and something happened to her daughter as well. So again, a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of religious trauma, because it's done in a confessional booth, and you can choose to forgive her. Now, what's interesting is if you choose to forgive her, it actually points you towards the bad ending. So there's a little weird context there of like, should you actually forgive them for that behavior? And I think the reason why the forgiving it leads you towards the bad ending is because you basically are saying that it doesn't matter what you did, you'll be fine. You're forgiven, right? Again, which plays into that religious trauma of people in Silent Hill were doing all sorts of terrible things because they knew if they prayed to the god or to the idea of the god, then sorry, there was something over there. To the idea of the god, they'd be forgiven. They could basically. It isn't until Claudia admits that she has sins that we see someone actually take accountability for their actions, right? Also, we learn a little bit of from the religious aspect. We get a little bit of that, like people using the church as a way to take advantage of people. We learn that through Vincent, through the note that we find out that he's basically been skimming the money from the church for his own personal gain. Right, so people are coming in trying to save their souls and feel forgiven and all of that stuff, and he's basically doing that and going, yes, give me all your money, I'm gonna go do these things. So he's basically taking advantage of other people's like sorrow and pain and stuff like that too. So again, a lot of religious trauma stuff on top of the childhood trauma, on top of the teenage trauma and the references of assault, right? So again, a lot of triggering topics in this once you kind of break it down, at least from my point of view. I might be completely off base here. Someone might have already dissected this and has a completely different idea, but this is all from my point of view. This is how I read this in what the game is trying to tell us. So overall, like, the story is is very deep and it's very singular character focused, which I think is a big departure from 2, where the thing in 2 is it's important that all the other supporting cast exists, right? Because that allows you to kind of view the actions of James from different points of views and different people, right? Different motivations, like how Angela handles it, how Eddie handles it, why they do what they did, and stuff like that, right? But the reason why I like Heather as a character is she never like truly buys into the idea that there's all this like, you know, craziness, mysticism, and all of that, even though she goes face to face with a lot of these like weird creatures and stuff. But she also like stands her ground, right? She is very like, no, I'm taking charge here, right? She's never taken aback. She doesn't really take a whole lot of guff from anybody. The joke at the end where it's like, don't you think blondes have more fun? I think is her way of kind of lessening the blow of the idea that she has got her revenge, but her dad's still gone, right? Like she still has to process all of that, and she has to also process all these memories she's engaged with too. So the fact that she comes out and makes a joke shows that she's like, okay, I need to take a step back. Let's make a funny joke, and then we can maybe move on to some sort of like personal healing and stuff. I really like Heather as a character. I really do, because like perfect example is just her interaction with Leonard, where she's like, oh, I guess you're not a person. Now there is implications that she might have killed whoever did the initial assault, because there is a like she gets a knife and there is a dead guy, I believe, at the beginning of the game. So there's a little bit of context there as well. But she is the like least frightened, basically, of the of a lot of the protagonists through the Silent Hill series, where she has like a motivation and she's going to solve it, and she does that while also still processing all the things that have happened along the way. So I like I said, I really like this story. It's completely messed up, but that's how Silent Hill works. But I really do think this story is something worth talking about for a lot of reasons. Because there's a lot of stuff that Heather goes through that people are going through today. Like right now, people are dealing with, you know, being a survivor of assault. There's people dealing with surviving religious trauma. Religious trauma is a huge problem, I know, for people in the US specifically, where because there's this focus on God and state and stuff like that, a lot of people get effectively mentally and emotionally abused because of the faith and not because of anything they're actually doing. So there's talks about religious trauma, there's talks about just general abuse, mental, physical trauma, right? So, and I think that all of those are very important topics. I really do. I think people need to find a space safe enough for it to talk about, but I think there's things that this opens a door of to talk about that are really worth talking about. So that's about everything for the story. I probably missed some stuff. I don't remember every detail, but those are the stuff that kind of stuck out that I did really want to talk about. Overall, if you can't tell, I love Silent Hill 3. It is, like I said, it's probably my favorite. It and Shattered Memories kind of go back to back. We'll talk about Shattered Memories once we get through it, obviously. But overall, I really love this game. I would say that, if it's not obvious, highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. It's not difficult to play. You can turn down the combat. You can turn down the puzzles. You like, they're basically the only thing that keeps you from playing this game is the fact that this copy is kind of expensive. Let me look it up for you, just to give you an idea. So a copy of Silent Hill 3 for PlayStation. This is a $200 game, roughly. It's $196.59 is the thing. So it's basically from $190 to $200 is what you're looking at. So, do I recommend you spending $200 on this? No. Emulate the game, please. If you're going to play it, emulate it. Save the money, unless you have the money to blow. Like, if you got like thousands of dollars, you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Fine. Buy the Silent Hill games. That's great. But this is a very expensive investment. So I will say my recommendation comes with the same caveat that a lot of these are going to have. Know that this is probably going to be a very expensive game, and if you do intend to buy it, be prepared for that. If you don't intend to buy it, I recommend I do recommend emulating it. So, but it gets a hard recommend for me. Absolutely love this game. Will continue to love this game probably till the end of time. I'm glad we played it again, because I was kind of iffy about it. I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like it as much playing it, because I haven't played it in quite some time, but I do recommend it. So that's going to be it for the little review video here. Thank you for everybody watching over on YouTube. I do appreciate you being here. If you want to join us in chat, we are MaskofGames over on Twitch. Don't forget to follow on Twitch, but also like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. All of that helps push this out to the algorithm so we can meet more of you lovely people. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.